The world's a pretty big place. With our busy lives, no reasonable person can be expected to keep up with the biggest headlines each week, so I'm here to do it for you. This is Tony Pearson coming to you on behalf of WHIP with this week's Big Picture. Happy holidays, everyone. As a college student, I did go home for the holidays, but I'm back now to record this so I can keep you all up to date on what's going on around the world. As you all know, the past few episodes have been kind of heavy with all the election stuff, so I'm going to take this one a little bit easy and just talk about a few things. I'm going to start off with what's going on in America because I honestly think that makes the most sense because most of our listeners, and I personally am in the U.S., there is, of course, all kinds of news going on right now about Donald Trump, his various appointments and things like that. I'm going to wait to report on that stuff too hard until all of the appointments are final. Right now, a lot of the stuff is some crazy speculation, but here's the gist of what's new. The final numbers for the vote are just about in, and it looks like Hillary Clinton definitely has beaten Donald Trump as far as the popular vote goes, beating him by just about 1.7 million votes. I had mentioned in an earlier episode that all of the counts weren't in and that a lot of news sites were jumping the gun and saying things before we had the concrete numbers. But at this point, it is a really, really safe bet to say that Clinton won the popular vote. Of course, this changes nothing as far as the actual election goes. Trump still has the electoral vote. So unless something really crazy happens and the electors don't vote based on essentially who they're supposed to, he's going to be our president, and that's that. There have been a lot of people saying that the electors should do that. They should not vote for Trump. I personally think that would set a horrible precedent because if you do it once, it's easy to do again. And people would get really mad. Keep in mind, a lot of people did vote for Trump, and to have an election taken away from you like that, like I said, it would just set a horrible precedent. It would make people really angry. And I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's a better idea to deal with the Electoral College as a whole and either get rid of it or keep it as a whole, but to do that the right way through the legislative process and not through this kind of shady telling people not to listen to their constituents. Bad idea, I think. Related to that, though, there have been reports of electors getting death threats, among other things, from Clinton supporters, unfortunately, especially in cases where the electors have made it clear that they are not going to change their vote. So once again, these are the rules of the game. We all knew these rules going into it. If we want to change it for the next election, I think we should. I think we have every right to push for our lawmakers and stuff like that to change. But this election's already behind us. And of course, it goes without saying that death threats and things like that are completely uncalled for. As for Trump himself, like I said, I'll go into the appointments in more detail as they become more finalized. Right now, the ones that are the most interesting are probably his appointments of Steve Bannon as his chief White House strategist and senior counselor, Senator Jeff Sessions as the Attorney General, and Jeffrey Eisenach as one of his aides. Now to get into a little bit about each one of these people without jumping into it super far, Steve Bannon serves as the executive chairman of Breitbart News, which is a somewhat famous, very far right, some people call it an alt-right news outlet. If you can call it news, it's much more based around opinion pieces and editorials and stuff like that. While the publication itself is known for being sexist, racist, etc., and I don't like throwing those words around, but if you go on Breitbart and look around at the articles that are there, I think it's very clear that it is. For the most part, real news does shine through from time to time, but honestly, for me personally, anything that associates itself with that other kind of stuff is just kind of discredited as a whole. But while Breitbart is very clearly that kind of publication, and while Bannon is very clearly involved with Breitbart, his own personal life doesn't have that much controversy around it. The things that he has actually personally said don't really say that much. So while there are a lot of people right now jumping on the whole Steve Bannon is a literal Nazi train, I'm not going to make that judgment call so fast. But his association with Breitbart is definitely concerning. Moving on to the other appointment, to Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions is, in my opinion, much more concerning. This is a man who called the NAACP and the ACLU un-American and communist-inspired for trying to, and I quote, force civil rights down the throats of people. He also voted against a law that would have prohibited cruel or inhumane treatment of individuals under custody of the United States. He voted against the Matthew Shepard Act that defined violence motivated by sexual orientation as a hate crime. He was actually denied a federal judge position by a Senate committee after multiple Department of Justice lawyers testified under oath that he had made multiple racist comments, including calling a white civil rights attorney a disgrace to your race. Not only that, but he also seems to be a climate change denier. So, yeah, we'll talk more about him in the future, I'm sure. And the last person I had brought up, Jeffrey Eisenach, is essentially just a crusader against regulation, especially as far as FCC or Federal Communications Commission things go. In the past, he has been anti-net neutrality, which I think is absolutely terrible. Being against it, not net neutrality. Net neutrality is a fundamental part of what makes the internet great. It is the idea that all data is treated equally by service providers. So, for example, if I created my own website tomorrow with my own servers and stuff like that, once I got it all up and running, you'd be able to connect to that just as easily as, say, Netflix or any other big website. Without net neutrality, internet providers can kind of skew these things. They can restrict traffic to certain areas in order to help bolster websites of their choice. They could even break up the data that you actually have access to in general. For example, they could make it so that you have to pay extra to have access to YouTube and pay extra to have access to Netflix. And they could do all of these things without any involvement from YouTube or Netflix themselves. A blow to net neutrality, in other words, is a huge blow to freedom in general on the internet. It's very, very important. So that's also concerning. I'll definitely keep you all up to date on these appointments and what they do, especially the net neutrality guy, because that stuff is pretty close to home for me. The internet's pretty important. But that's just about it as far as Trump and his appointments and all that stuff goes. Moving on to other U.S. news, the United States Geologic Survey has discovered approximately 20 billion barrels worth of oil underneath Texas, making this the largest estimated continuous oil accumulation that the USGS has actually ever assessed in the United States. Now, there are a whole bunch of important points about this discovery. It is just an estimation. This is not all oil that they are exactly sure exists. There are many different ways you'd have to go about getting to this stuff. You would have to drill for some of it. You would probably have to do some fracking in other areas to obtain it. But at the end of the day, this is 20 billion barrels of oil that is likely recoverable in some way that's already here in the U.S. This estimate also came with some other news, with the USGS also stating that they estimate 16 trillion cubic feet of associated natural gas and 1.6 billion barrels of natural gas liquids have also been found. So this means we're a little bit less screwed when it comes to running out of oil. But oil, of course, is still really awful for our environment, so we got to keep on working towards finding better sources of power. Speaking of other sources of power, Elon Musk revealed during a recent meeting that Tesla's solar roof will probably cost less and last twice as long as a regular roof. To quote the man himself, he said, "It's looking quite promising that a solar roof actually costs less than normal roofs before you even take the value of electricity into account. So the basic proposition would be, would you like a roof that looks better than a normal roof, lasts twice as long, and costs less, and by the way, generates electricity? Why would you get anything else?" And that's quoting Musk. The reason why this is achievable is simply because the way roofs are currently built and supplied is super inefficient. The amount of money that it takes to get those materials together, have someone actually build the roof, it costs a lot of money. With his plans to kind of standardize the whole industry and essentially start mass producing these things, it makes sense that it would end up a little bit cheaper. The end price for the customer will ultimately vary depending on the price of the house and the difficulty of installation, but a cheaper roof is a cheaper roof. Not only that, but as I mentioned before, these are solar roofs, which means that they will be generating electricity, which will save energy on its own. Combined with Tesla's new power walls, which are wall-sized batteries which can store a lot of power, and you can start saving a lot of money. This announcement came alongside an announcement that Tesla would be merging with SolarCity, another solar technology company, with the vast approval of shareholders from both companies. So it's looking pretty promising for Tesla. Speaking of technology that affects the environment, I've got some bad news about the environment itself. As we move into winter, the North Pole is an insane 36 degrees warmer than normal. Right now, the Arctic is descending on a period known as polar night. Due to the tilt of the Earth, that part of the globe gets very, very little sun, and it's supposed to be a time when the Arctic gets super, super cold, allowing the ice to grow and thicken and replenish itself each winter. Now, 2016 has already been a bit of a weird year for the area. Multiple records have been set for low levels of monthly sea ice, but this kind of takes the cake. 36 degrees is a huge, huge discrepancy. Keep in mind that global temperature changes of just 1 or 2 degrees can have huge impacts on the entire world. Now, this is just happening right now, so what it's actually going to do when spring rolls back around, if it never starts to get colder, we can't really say. Of course, it's going to be really awful for animals like the polar bear, which rely on the ice caps for their habitat, but it's going to be bad in general. People talk about the ice going away and the sea levels rising. This is what it looks like. Right now, these things are supposed to be growing stronger, and they're just not. If anything major changes about this, I'll be sure to update you guys. We all gotta hope it gets better, because if it doesn't, this is bad news. Finally, for our last piece of news, NASA just published their peer-reviewed EM Drive paper, and it looks like it works. Now, this is a huge deal, and I'll tell you why. The EM, or electromagnetic drive, is a propulsion system that was first proposed by a British inventor named Roger Scheuer back in 1999. And it seems to work by bouncing microwaves back and forth inside a cone-shaped metal cavity to generate thrust. The problem is, scientists aren't really sure how it works, because the EM drive just uses electromagnetic radiation to create thrust, and that shouldn't be possible. More specifically, it violates Newton's third law, which states that everything must have an equal and opposite reaction. Usually, when you generate thrust, you use some kind of fuel, which is usually then burnt and ejected at high speed. And as that exhaust pushes against whatever, that force then pushes the object in the opposite direction. That's how rockets work. The point is, you need a fuel to create exhaust to push your thing. That's one of the biggest problems with space travel that we face today, is that we have to spend so much time and energy getting that fuel into space in order to power our own movement. The farther and faster you want to go, the more fuel you need. More fuel means more weight, and more weight means you need more fuel to move things faster, and it's an awful cycle. If you could find a way to just have a battery or something like that and power some kind of device, well, you could do almost anything. And that's what the EM drive seems to do, even though it should be impossible. Now, I'm really happy about this news piece because I believe this is ending on a positive note. We don't really understand how this thing works yet. And even when it does, it only seems to work a little teeny tiny bit. They haven't used this to really drive anything. It's an incredibly small amount of force that they're able to generate with it right now. Even so, the fact that this works at all is monumental. It could make a huge difference for future space travel, and it could make things a hell of a lot easier when it comes to getting to Mars. So on that positive note, I'm going to end it for today. Thank you all for listening to WHIP's Big Picture with me, Tony Pearson. I hope you all are liking the break from all the crazy election stuff. I know we had to talk about it a little bit today, but we can't not. That being said, it's nice to talk about other stuff, and I especially love talking about new inventions. Have a great week, everyone. Happy holidays.